Item 6, I'll look to Cindy Perry for this presentation. It comes from the Finance Committee. It's a recommendation for solid waste recycling program strategy and economic study. And if there's chair of or member of Finance Committee that wants to provide any prelude or intro to this, looking down the road of the council, or anybody on the Finance Committee that has seen this. This is a recommendation for Finance Committee to bring it to the council. So we'll offer it then to Cindy Perry to go through this, and expect a 60-minute presentation on this item. Thank you, Cindy.
We'll try to be entertaining. I'm going to do a little dog and pony show while they switch out the presentations. Well, Cindy Perry, Deputy Director for the Public Works Department. Today's discussion is to present the findings of a solid waste study that was completed over the summer. So by way of background, the study was commissioned following Public Works performance audit, which was presented to council last January, and staff was asked to retain a firm specializing in refuse operations to review and compare city operations to the and costs to the private sector. The day after that council meeting, the Finance Committee chair also requested that staff present findings on potential savings from outsourcing residential trash collection. And this is the committee's recommendation to bring the item forward to you today. And in March of last year, staff provided our report to the Finance Committee, which at that time didn't include apparent savings by outsourcing. And we recommended we proceed with a refuse consultant to do a more in-depth study, which would also include recommendations on compliance implementation, which is a staff priority. This past November, the consultant presented their findings to the Finance Committee, and following discussion there, the committee referred the report to the full council with no specific recommendation on outsourcing or compliance. And today, you're going to receive a lot of information about trash, but there are two main issues where staff is seeking direction from this body. One is on outsourcing, and the other is for approval to move forward with an ordinance, programs, and contract modifications to meet regulatory compliance mandates from the state. And those in the short term require focusing mostly on commercial food waste programs. Staff proposes bringing back to this body a more detailed rate discussion, but as a refresher, an 18-month rate plan was approved in December of 2018 and included a consumer price index adjustment of about 3.6% for regular inflationary growth and a modest extraordinary increase for processing costs associated with regulatory requirements, which was requested by our waste processor. After July 1 of this year, there are no rate adjustments approved. So outsourcing and whether it will save the city money is really not a black and white question. The next two slides are a glimpse into staff's thought process that led to our conclusion that there likely wouldn't be city savings from outsourcing, or if there was, probably not a significant amount, especially without other budget cuts. It's important to keep in mind that refuse is an enterprise fund, and it does not rely on any general fund revenue. It operates like a business. Just like iPhone is a business to Apple, refuse is a business unit to the city. And like Apple, the city has multiple business units that are supported by general administrative functions like HR, security, customer service, accounting, facility maintenance, IT support, and legal services, all of which are essential costs of doing business. These general expenses are shared amongst all business units. So let's say that Apple decides to stop making iPhones for some reason, and they don't make corresponding staffing and operating adjustments at Apple headquarters. Those retained administrative and operating costs are likely going to be spread to other business units, and the cost of your kid's Apple laptop likely is going to increase. The consultant will discuss the concept of retained cost in a much more sophisticated and direct way to our situation, but essentially those retained costs may transfer to other funds, including the general fund, or additional budget reductions may be necessary to balance the loss of revenue. Or, if we went through a competitive procurement process, some, but probably not all, of those costs may be taken on by a private hauler directly, or they may pay the city via a franchise or admin fee to perform some of those services. A private hauler would likely recover these costs in the customer rate and with a long-term contract request. This particular slide shows services city crews provide that also may need to be reassigned, again, potentially to the general fund or included in a procurement process if the operation was outsourced. And some of these are freeway ramp cleaning, large homeless cleanups, KRCB, volunteer event support. The crews also support wind and storm cleanups. Staff recommendations will be made on the next two slides, but to help focus the conversation, I'm going to reemphasize a couple of points. First, staff is asking for direction on outsourcing. If we pursue outsourcing, we need to establish a procurement process, which means bidding services or renegotiating with existing haulers. If we maintain status quo, we need to make operational improvements to city operations and address the contract for the area currently serviced by Burtec, which contract expires in June. Given the complexity and time to implement either decision, staff is requesting a 2-year extension to Burtec's residential collection contract. Second, the city needs to be aggressive to get out of hot water with the state. State mandates have impacted commercial services first, but will be impacting residential as well, and we are not fully in compliance. So staff is urging approval to move forward with changes to the municipal code and short-term modifications to our contracts, which will remedy that issue. Staff would return to council with proposed changes and a rate plan for discussion and approval. So that really concludes staff's comments. At this time, I'd like to ask that Richard Tagore Irwin and William Schoen from R3 to approach the podium. And following their presentation, we have city staff from multiple departments here. We have our private haulers here. We have our collection crews are here today, and we'll be open to answer questions after the consultant's presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Tagore Irwin. I'm a principal with R3 Consulting Group. I've been working with cities throughout California doing very similar projects for a little over 30 years, dating back to when AB 939 was first written. I actually helped write that. I don't know if I want to take credit or blame for it. It's up to you to do that. Well, also with me is William Schoen. He's also was a principal with R3 Consulting. He's a senior consultant with us now. And William has a lot of long-term experience running operations and finances. So I'm going to kind of walk through the first couple slides. I'm going to turn it over to William, then I'm going to jump back in. Let's see here. So we wanted to kind of talk to you about the legislative compliance issues. Cindy touched on those, but my kind of introductory remarks are really going to help set that up in motion for all the changes that the city is going to be looking to need to do, regardless if it retains its services or outsources it or modifies contracts. There's a lot of changes you're going to have to be making. Overall findings and recommendations, and then key conclusions, and then hopefully answer any questions that you may have. A couple of pieces of key legislation that are affecting all of your customers, your residential customers, your commercial customers, are AB 341 and 1826. It's commercial mandatory recycling and mandatory organics collection for your commercial businesses. Those laws have been on the books for several years. Unfortunately, the city has kind of struggled with compliance with those laws and is kind of under the gun from Cal Recycler right now to put in place programs to comply. You've got to make some changes to your ordinances. You have to make some changes to your commercial contracts to comply with that. It's not optional to just ignore it. So that's going to be coming back to you with some changes there. AB 1594, what that does is as of January 1st of 2020, green waste that had been used as alternative daily cover is no longer eligible to get diversion credit for. The city's in good shape there. It is composting as green waste, so that doesn't affect you as much. It can affect your self-haul customers. Historically, what's happened with the use of ADC, green waste as ADC, it's a lower cost option. Composting the green waste is a higher cost option. So it's a cost implication that's gone on for several years. The significant piece of legislation that's passed 2 years ago is SB 1383. One of your earlier speakers had talked about climate action. That's what this bill does. It specifically addresses the organics going to disposal, to get it out of disposal in a very aggressive fashion to help reduce greenhouse gas reduction in climates. What it amounts to is the state as a whole has some goals to divert from landfill disposal its organics. And organics is not just green waste, it's not just food waste, it can also be contaminated paper and fiber materials as well. So it's a very large portion of the waste stream. On a statewide basis, it's about half of the disposed waste stream is organics. And the first goal that the state has to comply with was by January 1st of 2020, 50%. Didn't make it. Not even close. So that's one that's been kind of bypassed. We're all struggling to meet that. And Cal Recycle has to report this back to the legislature, their compliance with it. They're not going to make that goal, so we don't think the legislature is going to be too pleased about it. They're going to push that downstream to all of us at the local level. The next one really is January 2022. That's when enforcement starts hitting, and that's why the city, as all cities in California, are really working very hard right now to get their programs in place to make sure they're in compliance. And the enforcement is penalties the state can start assessing penalties to local jurisdictions, i.e. they can assess penalties to the city of Riverside for non-compliance, whether it's you don't have a mandatory ordinance or you don't have a program. They can come down and fine you folks, and the penalties are substantial, anywhere from $500 to $10,000 per day. Along with that, some new programs have to start. Right now, again, the focus is on commercial and multifamily organics. In 2022, July 2022, you're going to have to be adding in food waste into your residential stream. It's a new program and it's additional costs associated with it. You have a couple of years to get that going, but it's a non-optional program. In January 2024, they expand the enforcement penalties to both the local jurisdictions and the generators. And the generator being defined as a business, commercial businesses. If they don't comply, if they don't have an organics program, they can also be fined. So it's hitting pretty hard. From what we understand in terms of the regulations that are proposed, they're basically starting to be an adoption process now. The fines are laid out. It's a very, very prescriptive process that they're doing. And in January 2025, it's a 75% reduction of organics being disposed. That's really kind of setting up what is going to be occurring for the next several years. I'm going to turn it over to William to talk about the actual operations. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. As part of our review, one of the things we did was to effectively do a performance review or review the operations of the division. And I think the starting point is, the good point is that we found the division, staff and management are doing a good job with the resources that they have. The issues that there are with the operation don't relate to the staff or management, they relate to the level of investment in the operation. The available resources that they have are not sufficient for them to be able to operate to industry standards. There needs to be investment in the operations if you're going to continue to move forward with municipal services. There are really two things that are fundamental to operations, to operating a safe and effective collection operation. One is that the management and staff have to be qualified, which they are. The other is the relationship between the division and the maintenance operations. They are a collection operation. Fleet is primary to their success. So the fleet has to be providing and maintaining good vehicles. There has to be a good relationship, and there is. So you have the fundamentals necessary to run a good operation. What you need to do, again, if you move forward, is make the necessary investment. And the existing residential rates are simply not covering the cost of operations and the costs that are needed to move the operation up to what is now the industry standard. As Richard just touched upon in terms of regulatory compliance, the city needs to incorporate SB 1383 residential organics recovery requirements into any new residential contract, and they need to do the same thing with any commercial contract. So SB 1383 is really the driving force in terms of compliance and what the city needs to deal with in the coming years. In terms of the required investment, at a minimum, based on our review, the city needs 7 new fully automated vehicles at a total cost of about $2.6 million. They need 2 additional drivers. Effectively, they need 2 additional routes, and they need 1 additional supervisor. Those are really the minimum investments needed to get the division up to a reasonable operating point. That doesn't address SB 1383 compliance. That's an additional cost that will have to be dealt with once that program is developed. As I mentioned, that accounts for 2 additional routes. The current routes that are operating in the city, drivers are doing a great job, but they're doing too much. They're being asked to do too much without enough routes. So you need some additional routes as well as new vehicles. In terms of the finances, at the end of this fiscal year, it's projected that the division is going to have a little more than $4 million in operating reserves. That's a good thing. You want to have cash available for unforeseen circumstances and conditions that you have to meet. So you have a reasonable, or will have a reasonable operating reserve at the end of this fiscal year. The flip side is there is projected to be effectively an annual deficit of $4.1 million at the end of this year. Your expenses for this fiscal year are $4 million, effectively more than your revenues. So that can't continue for any long-term period of time. And really, within the next 2 years, based on projections, that operating reserve without any rate increase is going to disappear, and you're going to start to be in a negative situation, and you certainly don't want and can't operate like that. So what we're recommending, well, actually, just to give you some context, just to cover the $4.1 million shortfall that's projected for this fiscal year would require an 11.6% rate increase. And we're recommending that the city authorize at least that level of rate increase on July 1st of this year, even if it decides to, whether it decides to maintain operations or outsource those operations. If the decision is to continue to move forward with the division and make the investment, we're recommending a rate increase of 20% on July 1st of this year. That will provide sufficient funding for the additional routes and staff that I just covered. On the commercial side, you have an open competition system in the commercial sector. You've got 3 haulers competing for accounts. That's good from the standpoint of choice. The businesses have a choice of 3 haulers to choose from. But from the standpoint of managing it from the city's perspective, and especially with respect to compliance, it's very difficult. There's moving parts. It's very difficult to try to comply, and you're under the gun now in terms of compliance. The current contracts are outdated. They don't effectively address mandatory commercial recycling, AB 341, which is not currently fully implemented and needs to be implemented. You don't have really any meaningful mandatory organics collection operations. AB 1826, which is in place now, requires commercial businesses to recycle organics. And as Ms. Perry talked about briefly, the city is under the gun from Cal Recycle. I think this month the city is being directed to Cal Recycle's jurisdictional compliance unit. So the board is getting serious and is expecting the division to have a plan and execute that plan for compliance within a reasonably short period of time. So that's really the number one priority as we see it, is getting in compliance with the state's mandatory recycling and mandatory organics recycling, AB 341 and AB 1386, which exists now. SB 1383 is another thing to deal with in the future that's going to require additional steps. Recommendations. If the city keeps their municipal operations, it needs to invest. The residential routes need to be rerouted. We'd recommend a further review of street sweeping productivity. There may be some opportunities for savings on the street sweeping side. You have a manual service option now. Any customer can request manual service, and yet you operate a fully automated collection system. And mandatory, or the option for mandatory service within a fully automated collection system is just counterproductive. We recommend that the option for an account to subscribe to mandatory service be eliminated. There are, however, accounts that do require manual service. However, many of those accounts are not complying with your requirements in terms of how to containerize the material for manual collection. That presents both a safety and cost issue. So I think it's going to be very important going forward, whether you maintain operations or outsource, to, again, eliminate the option for mandatory service, but where mandatory service has to be provided, you enforce the requirements in terms of how that material is presented for collection by the operation. You also have an incentive off policy. That's a policy where when a driver completes their route, they can go home. That's an old, antiquated policy. It doesn't support good customer service or safe operations. It's been eliminated in most jurisdictions. You can't run a safe and effective operation with an incentive off system, and we would strongly recommend that as part of future negotiations, you seek to eliminate that as an option. Your budget does currently have funding for new vehicles, $1.1 million. So that effectively allows for the replacement of 3 vehicles every year. With your current fleet and vehicles lasting about 10 years, that's a sufficient amount of annual funding to replace the fleet on a regular basis, so that at the end of 10 years you've got new vehicles in place and continue to operate. What we're recommending, however, is that you also put in place a fleet replacement fund. So if that money isn't used in any given year, it doesn't go away. It goes into a fund, it's maintained into that fund, and the fleet or the division, however they manage that, they're able to access that money as needed to replace vehicles when those vehicles are required to be replaced. The issue with fleet is that you have too many old vehicles now, so that's why you need to replace 7 of those vehicles is our projection currently, to get a fleet that's a reasonable age, so that 3 vehicle replacement schedule that you do have funding for will allow you to maintain that fleet over time. We also recommend that you evaluate your condition of your residential carts and develop a 10-year replacement plan. Carts are a substantial cost on the level of the collection vehicles as well. So they're an asset that you want to manage, and you want to make sure that you have adequate reserves to replace those on a regular basis, so you're not facing a huge cost that you haven't anticipated over time. If you outsource or want to continue to consider outsourcing, we recommend that you further review the analysis of the costs that would not go away if the division outsourced operations. Ms. Perry talked about that briefly. The projection is at this point there's $4.1 million in costs that would not go away if the division's operations were outsourced. In addition, the city has a projected $14 million pension liability that would also remain if the operations are outsourced. You also should be, again, looking at your street sweeping operations, whether you decide to outsource those with solid waste, if that's a decision, or separate from solid waste if you decide to maintain those. They're really 2 different operations. You can look at those as individual or collectively. But in either case, we require or recommend that you conduct an additional review of those operations and determine exactly what specific amounts would remain. At this point, I think it's projected about $1.3 million of costs related to the street sweeping operation would remain. And if there's an opportunity to improve the efficiency and reduce cost of those operations going forward. You may also want to look at exploring if there's some goodwill in the operation with the private sector in terms of whether they'd be willing to perhaps assume some of the liabilities that the city has as part of any outsourcing of operations, particularly if there's a longer-term contract. That could include covering some of that pension liability. So there's opportunity to negotiate or at least consider the opportunity to obviously get something back were you to decide to outsource it. It's a valuable operation for the private sector, and there's certainly value that the city should be able to get back from that. Whether that's going to be sufficient to to reduce rates is an unknown. You simply won't know that until you go out and do the RFP and get the bids, if that's the way you decide to choose. But if you do decide to outsource, you'll need to issue an RFP and conduct a competitive procurement. In terms of the commercial service, again, compliance with mandatory recycling and mandatory organics is the number one thing that you have to deal with now. You're going to need to revise your municipal code to put in requirements specific to those two services, as well as SB 1383 in the future. The current commercial contracts expire on July 1st, 2023. SB 1383 becomes effective January 1st, 2022. So you're going to have to renegotiate those contracts to put in place the requirements for SB 1383 so that you are in compliance come January 1st, 2022. You also want to look at how you want to move forward with your commercial collection system. Again, now it's open competition. Everybody competes for accounts throughout the city. There's any number of ways you could restructure that. You could keep that system. You could establish defined service areas and have one or multiple haulers in the specific service areas. You could have a single hauler providing commercial services throughout the city. And you could potentially, if you decided to outsource your residential collection operations, you could do a single RFP for both residential and commercial services citywide with a single hauler. So there's a number of ways to proceed. There's pluses and minuses to each of those, but you want to determine how you want to move forward with your commercial collection system, so at the end of the current contracts, you have a plan and you can execute and move forward effectively. Key conclusions, you have to work towards legislative compliance again, amend the municipal code and amend the franchise agreements. Again, we're recommending that you raise the rates on July 1st to cover costs, at least 11.6%, 20% if you decide to maintain operations, and you need to look at redesigning the commercial collection system, both to address SB 1383 when it becomes effective January 1st, and also in terms of where you're going to move forward at the end of your current contracts with how that system is designed and whether or not you're going to make any changes to your current open competition system. I think that's it, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any clarifying questions before speaker cards?
I do have a clarifying question. This would be for staff. Thank you so much for your report. Very insightful. And staff, my question has to do, when reading the report, that obviously there's a lot of moving parts in this, but I just want to make sure that we're clarifying this. There are two basic parts. One, you're talking about the oh my goodness, the green, the organics. You're talking about the organics and looking in-house or outsourcing that. And then you're also keeping that in or outsourcing it. And then you also have the commercial component where you have to upgrade the contracts to comply. Obviously, we have compliance issues at this point that we need to make decisions on because we're required to comply with state service. The things that I pulled out of this report, obviously, were that our sanitation have done an exceptional job. In the report from the R3 group, basically said, we put a lot of focus on public safety, and it seemed like sanitation came in behind that, although it's a very important component of our city. I guess the point I want to make here and get some clarification on is that when you look into the future and how some of our waste is being used, and I'll use two examples. One is our sanitation, our old dump site, where we're getting the methane gas and pulling some of that. It looks like we're going to expand that. And then we have our grease to gas out of our sewer plant. When we look at this in terms of recycling our organics, again, receiving benefit from that, I think we have to get a broader perspective of this, because at some point it would seem like these could come together and really work for our city's benefit, because trash is becoming a valuable commodity and one that can be very beneficial for our cities in the future. So the clarification, I guess, here is that we're looking at the one component on the organics and deciding whether we're going to do this in-house or not, and then also making sure that we look at the commercial and decide whether we're going to keep that or continue outsourcing it. Correct?
Let me interject. There's 5 recommendations.
This is the 2 questions that I have for staff.
So I'll do my best to address.
Sure.
Really, there are 2 main issues, and I'll attempt to do my best to explain. So we have residential collection, and that's made up of city crews and a private hauler. And then we have commercial collection, which is made up of 3 private haulers. So what staff is asking for input today is, do we maintain, on the residential side, do we maintain the city crews, or do we look to outsource that? And then overall, we have organics compliance issues. So in the short term, the organics compliant issue really is focusing on the commercial side. So that would be an updated municipal code and some contract changes, and then we would follow with residential. And to your point about the sustainability efforts within the city, we are working on a pilot project related to organics, where organic material is taken by the trucks to the Aguamanza transfer station. They mix it into some magic slurry, and the thought is to take that to the water quality control plant, and the city is in the process of applying for a $3 million grant, and Chris probably can speak a little more to that if there's additional questions. But I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
So if you put up
It
put
does.
up
Thank
the
you.
recommendations. There's 5 recommendations up there, and I was going to speak to that because I think that you're right. There needs to be some clarification, and probably some separate votes. And so I talked to the city attorney that he says that's fine. We can do that. So we'll probably take. There's a couple of things that we have to do. We have to make a decision on today, and there's others that we can give direction. And number 1 is one of those. So we're gonna. There's a number of different fruits on our plate. We can take as big of a bite as we want out of number 1 today, but the other ones we have to consume. We have to make some decisions on because of the state mandating them, and because of a response that we have to provide them. So with that being said, let's go to public comment, and then we'll come back and kind of separate some of those decision points to make it easier for the council and the public. First, Sherry Trevelyan, followed by Michael Sidoti, and then Ricardo Cisneros. Coming up, you have 3 minutes to address the city council as a whole on item 6. Sherry, then Michael Sidoti, and then Ricardo Cisneros. And if you do want, when you hear your name called, if you want to come up and wait in the wings there, that would be great to facilitate the discussion and public comment.
Hello, my name is Sherry Trevelyan. I'm a lifelong resident of Riverside. I grew up in the La Sierra area and attended the La Sierra Seventh-day Adventist Church. I now live in the Arlington area of Riverside. I am here today to support the solid waste department. Garbage man, trash collector, sanitation engineer, trash man, solid waste collector. Whatever name you call them, they are people, real people with real jobs, people with real families, people buying homes with real mortgages, people who have invested in our city, put down roots, or who were born and raised here. Real people who work at a job some would cringe at, a job that is so much more than just picking up the trash at our curbs, a job that does bulky item events on Saturday mornings when most people are sleeping in, enjoying their day off, or attending their child's sporting events. They do a job many residents don't ever see, cleaning up raw waste, needles, piles of rotting garbage, the encampments. Day in and day out, the people of the Solid Waste Department not only work to keep our neighborhoods and our city of Riverside clean, but to keep the city running. Being on the streets of Riverside every day, they are often the first to see things that need to be reported, to help someone in need, to lend a helping hand, and to make a small child's day by honking their truck's horn for them. These are the real men and women of the Solid Waste Department, and they deserve the city's support. We throw a lot of things away. Their jobs should not be one of them. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Michael Sidoti, followed by Ricardo Cisneros, and then Caitlin Tate.
Good afternoon, Councilman, members. My name is Michael Sidoti. I'm here to represent Solid Waste Department and let you know privatizing is not the answer. City's core foundation has been built on its in-house services and providing resources for the residents, making it convenient to those who live here. Everything from water, sewer, electric, gas, street sweeping, graffiti, parks, 311, and yes, our trash department. Yet we have always had a constant battle with competitors trying to take over services that we provide. We want to stop this battle and win this war. We know we stand strong with the city of Riverside's community, and they have always supported us. Very few cities still provide their own trash services, but all of them deal with an overwhelming amount of homeless people with their encampments in the neighborhoods and local businesses. Our solid waste team is the front line of dealing with these issues, everything from needles, feces, urine, catheters, drugs, and even weapons. The city has even tried using a contractor to take on this task, but was not effective or efficient. Outsourced service providers are incomparable with us. We have the ability to prosper financially using our department and giving us the resources and equipment we need. This department has the potential of being an asset of getting out of debt, which is crucial for our city. We need to be able to capitalize on extra services that we can provide, and we have shown that we have the dedication and the ability to get it done. To name a few, we could start by taking over commercial services, all city buildings, apartments, condos, even service construction sites with roll-off bins to continue to grow and help fund projects for our city's future. But we need to take action now. Our solid waste department is an opportunity that can be utilized at its full potential to fulfill the city's needs. We strive to go above and beyond for our residents without questions or any extra costs. Privatizing the department is a temporary fix for a permanent problem. Not only for our employees and our families, but for the residents, the same residents that have voted for you, endorsed you. They have given you the opportunity to sit in those chairs. They will forever be affected. In order to execute this process, we need to organize a game plan, not short-term, but long-term thinking. And any successful business owner will tell you need to spend money to make money, and it's a process that will take time, and it doesn't happen overnight. The city's refuse department strives on customer service, care, and safety of its residents and their children. It's in these times we need to build the city up and not tear it apart. Thank you, and we have your support.
Thank you. Ricardo Cisneros, followed by Caitlin Tate, and then Mike Beto.
Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Cisneros, Executive Secretary Treasurer of the Inland Empire Labor Council. We represent over 289,000 union members here in the Inland Empire. And with that said, the Inland Empire Labor Council stands strong with our members and our brothers and sisters from SEIU 721. Right now, as the city, as how I say the city of Riverside is one of the jewel cities for the Inland Empire, we should continue looking at continuing to build and be able to keep people to live here, work here, and eventually retire here. And outsourcing is not the answer. As we know, Riverside needs to keep good jobs locally and oppose outsourcing of these good jobs. Let's look at solutions to make solid waste and recycling profitable for the city. And by improving those services, it will help the city move forward. Because as you want to see it or not, some of you that are sitting up in that dais, solid waste is an economic engine for the city of Riverside. And the folks that work for you actually buy homes here, pay their taxes, and the simplest way of looking at it is revolving money, right? It's money that you're putting out for your city that eventually comes back to you, to the city of Riverside. So as the Inland Empire Labor Council, we stand strong with our brothers and sisters, and hopefully you will too. Thank you.
Thank you. Caitlin Tate, followed by Mike Beto, and then David Crone.
Thank you for your patience today with a 3-year-old. I've been doing my best to keep him quiet. My name is Caitlin. This is my son, Cameron. I'm here today to not only talk on my behalf, but on Cameron's behalf, because as a parent, that's your job, to stand up for your children. Sorry if this is a little emotional. This is a very sensitive topic for our family. As you can see, Cameron's favorite thing in the world is garbage trucks. We play garbage trucks, we watch garbage truck shows, we build pretend cities so garbage trucks can pick up the trash. I take Tuesdays off of work because it's garbage truck day. If we missed this, he would have a meltdown every single day. Cameron can hear them coming all the way down the street. He grabs all of his garbage truck stuff and runs outside, yelling with excitement as Mike and Duke, our amazing garbage truck men and friends, come rolling up the street. I cannot even begin to describe how much these two meant to both me and my son and myself. They have become our friends. They truly care about not only making Cameron happy, but making us feel important too, and they take the time out of their packed day to stop and make us feel important. They've given him trash can toys, coloring books, even Christmas presents. Jake, their supervisor, when learning of Cameron's love of garbage trucks, went out of his way to stop by our house and give him garbage truck gear, which just absolutely made his day. He also gave me his card, said if I ever needed anything, please don't ever hesitate to call him. We were actually contemplating moving to a different area, and one of the reasons we didn't was because we were going to lose Duke and Mike. So I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. There are a lot of families on our block that feel this exact same way as well, too. These men have dedicated over 30 years of their life to their careers to serving the city of Riverside. They are unsung heroes to a lot of people and do a lot of important things that you've heard today that we would lose if the department was no longer part of the city. I know that this is a business move, but I beg you to look past that and to see the people that would be affected by this change. And their lives are rooted by this move. I would gladly pay an increase in my services to keep such wonderful services and men in our lives. Please don't take away Cameron's heroes and my heroes, because they mean the world to him, an invaluable part of the city of Riverside. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Cameron's got a really cool hat too. Wonder where he got that.
Oh my goodness, our house is covered in garbage trucks.
Mike Beto followed by David Crone, and then Kenny Parada.
Well, that's going to be tough to follow, guys. First of all, Al, Rusty, good to see you guys. City Council, congratulations. Thank you for being here, of course. And I'm glad I was able to support you guys. I live in Ward 6. I live with Mr. Perry. I think I'll give you an idea, not literally, but I'll give you an idea of
Got an ADU we don't know about?
of how my mind has been the last couple of months, and how important the men that are back here are into my life. I recently took out a large substantial loan and started building my house up. I contacted Burtech. I contacted the companies that were in my area. I asked them for putting out bins, picking up my bulky items. They said 2 weeks. They said, oh, we don't take that. Oh, you know what? Put it to the side of the road, and we may or may not pick it up. So here I am, construction crews, working, doing my normal 8-9 hour days, going home, putting in another 4 or 5 hours. The trash wasn't getting picked up. They weren't picking it up. They're saying it wasn't items that they in turn picked up unless they got paid more. I called the city of Riverside and explained what happened. And I will tell you, there is nothing more beautiful than seeing an old yellow truck pull up and pick everything up for you. Not once, but twice, my allotments that are allowed per year. That is not covered if you contract out. I am one house. Look behind you. They did it. He's seen my house, what it looked like before. And he sees what it looks like now. And it is the pride of the block. My neighbors next door started painting their house. The one to the other side started doing his windows, painting the house. It starts with one person. And I know that you guys have AB 341, 1826, 1594, and countless other codes that are going to be coming up. But yes, like Ms. Perry put it here, if you take one piece of the Apple out, your Apple Watch, pretty soon, the rest of it, it's going to go up. So you need to understand the finances. I'm sure you're going to educate and educate everybody else. For me being a resident, I understand. This has been kicked down many years. And yes, I have to pay to make it work better. I got that. And so will everybody else in Riverside if you explain and educate. And you have mine and everyone's support. Thank you.
Thank you. David Crone, followed by Kenny Parada, and then Melissa McKeith.
Hi, my name is David Crone. I live here in Ward 1. For 28 years, I've been a cooperative extension specialist, waste management specialist at UCR with statewide responsibilities for outreach on waste management issues. I have deep relationships with Cal Recycle, as well as with our local haulers, and as well as with our local public works department. I'm also on the utility board, and we recently went through a rate increase on utilities, and there's that aspect here as well. On the same piece of paper that people get, we're talking about a rate increase. And I understand the reasons for it. It's inevitable, but there are things that we can do to reduce that rate increase. We're pressured by two factors principally: an inability to market our recyclables, and also the green waste, 1383. It's going to become much more expensive to manage because the expectations for pulling organics out of landfills are going way up, and our expectations about keeping those materials clean so that we can land apply them, protect the environment. Okay, so there's one word that I think we need to start saying out loud around here. One word that we have a lot of strengths on, but we haven't been talking about and we haven't been organizing around, and that's sustainability. Sustainability here will save us money. In solid waste, if we can educate the public as to what they can recycle, if we can educate the public as to what goes in the green waste bin and doesn't go in the green waste bin, then the people who are managing our waste, Burtec currently, will be able to fulfill their functions much more affordably, and we can ask for lower rates. But it's going to take coordination because they don't do public education really. And we haven't really been doing a good enough job ourselves either. We need to start providing clear answers about what's recyclable. We need to provide clear answers about why does it matter that you don't put toasters and hoses and rags in your green waste. And I have pictures that will shock you. We can also make money and sustainability at the utility. If we start marketing electricity the way we should, sustainable electricity, and using that to replace unsustainable sources of energy like natural gas for home heating and for transportation especially, that makes our city money. So sustainability is actually an exciting enterprise. It's something, but we need to start talking about it. We need to start organizing on the idea of sustainability, dedicating city personnel out of the at the highest levels of city government, and keeping those people focused on that issue.
Thank you for your comments. Kenny Parada, followed by Melissa McKeith, and then Anthony Bertrand.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Kenny Parada. I'm actually a resident here at Ward 5. Also have friends and family that lives in Ward 1, 2, 3, and 7. So my family and friends are here. So saying that, you know, I'm also a representative of United Food and Commercial Workers Union. We represent members from Stater Brothers, Vaughn's, Ralph's, Albertsons, CVS, Rite Aid, and it's over 19,000 members in the San Bernardino, Riverside, Imperial, and LA County. So just so you guys, let you guys know, saying that our members do live here, and so I know we do not support outsourcing, and we want to make sure the jobs stay here in the city. And it seems like, you know what, it's better just to go through the reviews and what you guys need to be fixing. And I know myself, I'll gladly pay an extra money for the service. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Melissa McKeith, followed by Anthony Bertrand, and then Kevin Bowling.
Hi, good afternoon. Melissa McKeith with the Cure Group. Well, trash is cash, as David Crone was just telling us. And one way we know that is if we go to any of your fundraisers, there's always a lot of Burtec lobbyists there. And the reason they're there is because trash is cash. Some of you missed me earlier. One of the themes that I spoke on and will continue to speak on to this city council is that we have to start thinking more in terms of having green teams. David was an expert in trash. He's a resident here. Did anybody reach out to him to get his input on ideas before this proposal came forward? The answer is no. Can we give you ideas in 3 minutes? The answer is no. But there are a lot of approaches out there that would do the two things that he talked about that were most critical, one of which is reduction of waste. My mother lived in San Francisco. In the 1960s, she said if you didn't separate your trash correctly, they just didn't pick it up. It taught people how to separate. Now, we're never going to do that, but educating people about why it matters, trust me, is a painful experience, but it ultimately works. And the millennials and kids in school or little guys like Cameron, they really care about climate change now. They really care about protecting the environment. And we could start with at least having a component of this project that looks specifically at education. I heard nothing about what's the line item for that. The second is you make money if you handle your own waste. I don't know the comparison between what we save in pensions and other issues in the event we outsource. I didn't hear those numbers presented today. Maybe that outweighs what we could earn and save as a city if we in fact looked at waste as a way to make money more progressively than what we heard this afternoon. I can't tell that got analyzed. And so my reaction to the presentation today was it's pretty premature to have council to vote on it because those kinds of business decisions, and again, the whole issue about resilience or sustainability really wasn't presented by staff or the consultants. And I've got, how many? 41 more seconds? Oh my goodness. Is that true, Rusty?
You were very succinct.
The clock manager. Well, I wish I could reserve my time for later on the RPU water issues, which are near and dear to my heart. But since I am up here, I just want to say, you know, we heard a lot about that statute today that made us conserve more water and be more efficient. Let's efficiently take steps to reduce climate change by using our water to plant more trees. That's a reasonable and beneficial use under the California Constitution. Let's use our water now before somebody decides to take it away, and I'll be talking more about that in a little bit. But remember, trash is cash. Let's make some money.
Anthony Bertrand, followed by Kevin Bowling, and then Cindy Roth.
Good afternoon, council members. My name's Anthony Bertrand. I'm with Athens Services. We've been one of your private recycling and solid waste collectors for the last 19 years. We're very proud of that relationship we have with the city. And we do a lot of business throughout Southern California, and we've transitioned cities before. The most recent city happened to be the city of Whittier in 2017. You have a very difficult decision in front of you today. Whatever you decide to do with your private services, we will support you with the residential portion, whatever you decide. In terms of the drivers, I know it's extremely nervous and they're not knowing exactly what's going to happen, but I can guarantee you, as a solid waste provider and collector, drivers are the foundation of our company. They always have been, they always will be, regardless what new technology is out there. And They are number one and important to us. The drivers that we have transitioned, we've transitioned them with the best salaries, 100% benefits, their family and them are all covered 100% medical by the company. So we have great benefits. So whatever you decide to do, we support you. In terms of the commercial services that we provide, we're in support of a multi-zone, equally distributed among the haulers. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of organics, and to have a broad base of customers for each of the haulers allows us to spread the investment that we need in not only our vehicles, but our infrastructure, and help keep the costs low. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Kevin Bowling, followed by Cindy Roth, and then Frank Corral.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Bowling. I'm a lifelong resident of Riverside and a long-time waste management professional. I started out with Sears Disposal back in the 80s. They were in the La Sierra area specifically. I then moved on to Riverside Disposal, which was in the La Sierra area and Arlanza area. I then went to work for Waste Management, a little bit here, somewhere else, ultimately finishing my career here in Riverside with the infamous NUCO. You may not know NUCO, but NUCO was a very pivotal trash hauling company for many, many years here in the city of Riverside, dating back to 1967 when it was Al's Rubbish, and that was the first time that the city went out to bid. Just to give you a little background, the city went out to bid for the commercial services which was Zone 1, which was the municipality, the main footprint of the city of Riverside. Company name changed to NUCO. It's kind of a funny story. They were sitting around the table and saying, we need a new name. NUCO. How hard is that? So it became NUCO. NUCO picked up the trash in the city of Riverside in that Zone 1, an exclusive rate or exclusive, no competition. And then in the outer lining areas, there were those other haulers. There were Sears, Riverside Disposal, Gary's Disposal, Mark's Disposal. They were up by UCR. Those were those areas. And there was no Orange Crest or Mission Grove. As the time progressed and they went out to bid later on, the companies up there in the Orange Crest and Mission Grove, that was a separate. NUCO ended up picking those up because that was we had that area, but there was no. When it went out to bid, late 1999, that's how those things happen. And where we're at today is something that should have happened back in 1968. City of Riverside didn't want to be in the trash business in 1968, but they continued on, and by doing that, now we're here like this. And I'd like to suggest, again, I've got 35 years of experience, I'd like to give you these recommendations. I wouldn't outsource the residential within that main function area where the city of Riverside picks up. I would continue doing what they do now, giving them the rate increases that they need and the tools that they need to be in compliance with the law. Number two, the organic legislation currently, yes, it does affect residential, but it is specifically targeted at the commercial right now. So what's necessary to happen is there needs to be some municipal code changes, contract changes. May I finish?
No, you can't. So you can go ahead and provide the written, if you have it in writing, provide it to
You're
staff
welcome.
and they'll give it
Thank
to
you very
us.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet.
Thanks for the history lesson. Thanks for your recommendations. Just give it to us in paper form and we'll get it out. Cindy Roth, followed by Frank Corral, and then Richard Nino.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, and to the city team, good afternoon. I'm Cindy Roth, president of the Greater Riverside Chambers of Commerce. You know, these are difficult decisions. There's no question when we're doing this. To the employees that have worked so hard, to the trash haulers that have come in, that have worked, they all work many times together to help beautify this community. They all do an amazing job, and we thank them for that. The problem is we've got decisions that have to be made, and they're very difficult fiduciary responsibilities that you have before you. As you know, the next item is talking about the city's solvency. And we're talking about pensions and the increased costs. Those are always very difficult. Difficult decisions have to be made. When this item came up, I talked to some of the city team, and the issue is because we don't have an RFP that has gone out, we don't know what the numbers are. How do they really compare? What will we look at in regards to potential savings? And as Melissa McKeith indicated, we don't know what those numbers are to analyze it. And that's where you have to make those very difficult decisions. We've talked about the state requirements. They have to come forward, and we have to meet those, or we will have fines levied against us. You know, there are other increases coming. At the RPU board meeting, phase 2 of the next electric increases have been put forward. Then you're going to have water coming in the July timeframe. So these are all things that we have to. And so with the next item on your agenda, solvency is a tremendous concern. Costs of doing business are always difficult, but when you start looking at your bills and see the increases, have we done the best that we can do in regards to a fiduciary responsibility to look at those costs? We would encourage you to look at getting an RFP so you can at least evaluate that and analyze those costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank Corral, followed by Richard Nino.
Like the way I walk, huh? No more cane, no more wheelchair. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Manager, council members, and newly elected council members. Congratulations. My name is Frank Corral, former president of SEIU 721. I'm strictly here for a simple reason. The gentlemen and ladies that work for solid waste, you'll see their kids in the parks. You'll see their kids in school grounds. You'll see their parents shopping in our shopping centers. You'll see them all around our wards, your ward, and your newly elected ward. You'll see them here, and as well as you'll see the services that they're providing as the city of Riverside as their employee. I've known a lot of these young men since they're probably late teens. They came to work for the city of Riverside. Some started at graffiti, others went on to other departments. Right now, they're working in solid waste, and they're wondering where their future, not only theirs, but their kids, their wives, and all the relatives that are around them, because obviously if that goes down that trail, somebody in that family is going to have to help out. All I'm asking is you consider it, do the right thing. You've been up there, you've been elected. I think you can do the right thing. I think if we kick the can down like other council members have done, other city managers have done, we end up here. Are we going to kick the can down to somebody else? We need to take action. You know what to do. The gentlemen and ladies are right behind you. Support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Nino.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, City staff, and ladies and gentlemen of the public. Richard Nino with Burtek Waste Industries. Without question, these are very challenging times in the solid waste industry, so we can certainly sympathize with the City of Riverside and the difficult decisions that it has to make and is faced with. We stand in support of not only our fellow trash collector brethren, including the city waste haulers and our other fellow commercial haulers. We've worked together in partnership on many city initiatives to help beautify the city, as mentioned previously. Whatever decision the city decides to go in, we stand in support of those decisions and will facilitate any transitions as necessary or whatever may be required to help. With that, good luck in your decision, and we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex Brekovich.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, City Council. My name is Alex Brekovich. I'm Senior Regional Vice President with CR&R. The way I look at this, I think you have three issues before you. Deciding whether you want to privatize your collection, residential collection, or keep it in-house. You have a major compliance issue with the state of California. and you have some rate adjustments that you need to consider. In terms of your privatization, completely your call. We, as many of the other haulers, will support whatever decision you make. We don't have any skin in that game per se. So we're there to support you in whatever you decide there. On the compliance side, there's a lot of new regulations, as your staff has pointed out, that need to be addressed. Mandatory commercial collection, or mandatory commercial recycling collection, and mandatory commercial organics collection are huge. Your existing rate structure for commercial do not take care of those issues. So what will happen is you will have to adjust your commercial rates in an effort to address those issues. A big issue for your business community. Those rate adjustments are going to have to be significant, as staff and consultants have proved out. 20 to 25% rate adjustments are not going to be, I think, out of the question. So they're very difficult decisions to make. We're here to support the city in whatever decisions you would like to move in. CR&R has been here for over 19 years, providing service to your commercial customers, and we hope to be here for many years more. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And that framed up the decision process very well for us. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to take them one at a time, looking at the recommendations. It looks like item 2, I think, would be the easiest, since it's a state mandate to make a decision on. So is there any questions or motion on directing staff to draft an organics program ordinance in accordance with state mandates? Any questions on that? Okay, so there's a motion. Councilmember Melendrez, second. Councilwoman Valencia. Any questions? No. Okay, item 2, staff. Anything else we need to know about that? You got a motion and a second. All right, looking for a vote on item 2 and the recommendations. That's unanimous. Looking at item 3, similar to item 2 on recommendations, if you pull those back up in terms of the wizards in the back. There we go. We need to direct staff to amend the Agua Mansa transfer services agreement. If anybody hasn't been over to the material recycling facility, the MRF, to see the operations over there, you need to go. But we need to amend them again for state mandated recycling program inclusion. Any questions on that item? Is there a motion to direct staff to do that? We got a motion and a second. Any questions, concerns? Looking down the row. All right. Voting on item 3. That motion passes unanimously. Now looking at item 4, might be a little bit more discussion. Let me see. I can't remember. This one is an extension to a contract that, regardless of privatization, either way, that will have to be worked out. So I can't, staff, is there any decision point in terms of the other 2, item 1 and 5? Do they factor in? Are they going to influence item 4 at all? Or are they mutually exclusive?
No, they will not influence. This is to really more related to item number 1. However, regardless of whatever decision this body makes today, our contract expires in June. So in order to have continuity of service, staff is recommending that we extend that contract for that time period.
Any questions on that, Council? Councilman Fierro?
So staff is proposing that we extend the contract for 2 years, correct?
Correct.
And we've been doing 1-year extensions up to this point, right?
In recent years, yes.
Okay. Is there a reason we're switching from 1 to 2?
In order to afford enough time to either issue an RFP or to implement changes. Well, let me back up. So we have 2 years left. If we extend this, there'll be 2 years left on the residential collection contract. That's going to end. So whether we keep the service in-house, we're going to have to issue an RFP ultimately for that portion of residential collection. If you make a determination today to outsource, we're going to need time to craft an RFP. So either way, it's going to take that time period to implement whatever changes are recommended.
In 2 years. So staff recommendation is that 2 years would be more appropriate to get all that done than another 1 year.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Melendrez, and then
I
Councilman.
do have a question. Obviously, we're talking about insourcing and outsourcing, and this is the one question that I think is important because I think we need clarity on it. Extending the contracts during that time period, I think in all fairness, if we're looking at both, evaluating the benefits of maintaining the commercial portion of our collections and having that insourced. I don't know if we've done that study yet. It doesn't seem like we have, because what we're looking at is something that is pretty comprehensive. And obviously, you know, my focus here is to make sure that we have the best operations possible. And based on the report that was put together by R3 Consulting Group, we have an exceptional sanitation department. We as a council have not put enough effort or enough money to keep that moving the way it should be. But we also see, I think, a lot of benefit when we talk about the city of Riverside being innovative, but also being the green city and being the type of city that we want to be the model for other cities. Obviously, we want to be able to keep that moniker with us. I think it's important because we become the leaders in that. The one thing I want to be absolutely clear, and I'll share with my colleagues now, is that I believe that keeping the organics program in-house with our residential and our crews, I think it's extremely important. I think there's way too many components that we've worked on already, which includes the methane gas, the grease to gas, and this can really create financial benefit for us in the future, very similar to what our RPU does. So when we vote on these, I need to be crystal clear that this vote is one that says we are insourcing our organics program, that we are really looking at this in the future as a because we don't have very many profit-making components to the city, but that we keep this because I think it's the way to go in the future. So when I make this vote,
I think we did that in item 2. We just directed staff to do that in item 2.
I understand, but I think this is the part that we need to, I need to be clear on, because I think it's important that we continue going in the direction we're going to keep that in-house and also really benefiting in the future from what organics can bring us.
So in an attempt not to overcomplicate this, the organics piece crosses residential and commercial. What item 4 is asking is just to continue to allow Burtec to pick up 1/3 of the city. So that's basically the trucks and the people to pick it up. The organics piece is effectively handled separately through the processing side. And the amendments that we would propose on the Aguamanza agreement would direct anybody pretty much that's picking up waste in the city to take their organic material there to maintain it within the city. So that's the closed loop sustainability piece of this. And again, the intention, to your point, is to take that to the water quality control plant, and that would be funneled there and help to offset the cost of operating the treatment plant, plus could provide feed gas into the Southern California gas pipeline, which would have a benefit to the city.
Yeah, and I just want to be very careful about this. Our contractors have done an exceptional job, whether it be Burtec, Athens, or CRNR. They've done a fantastic work, but so has our group. I just wanted to make that very clear.
Councilwoman Placencia.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Cindy, you've been great at giving us very detailed information. So I just want to kind of have a conversation about number 4, because I do believe, I agree with you that it ties into number 1. So let's say we discuss, this is in the near future an opportunity to increase our revenue. And if we decide to do a rate increase, which it sounds like we need to, could staff consider, or maybe this is a conversation for council now as well, to maybe not extend the contract for so long, because we can look at, the city can look at doing all these services in-house. Since we're looking at a rate increase, what if we increase the rate to include all services that would be done in-house? So I think that would impact our vote for number one if we looked at that. So obviously I'd need staff, some more information from staff as to what that would look like. And I know you mentioned earlier that the reason why we had the option to extend for 1 year is because you weren't sure if you'd need more time. And so I just don't know if that's feasible. So I guess I'd like to hear if we decided to do a rate increase, and if staff could look at insourcing all of our trash services.
I think that would be, again, back to item one, we would have to go, we have to compare an RFP, do an RFP, and then compare that to whatever in-house study you've either done, or do you have that information right now, what it would cost for us to take over all the operations?
That I do. We did not study that specifically.
So that study would have to be compared to an RFP, and that, I think, would come through item one.
So then we could, let's say, if we decided to approve 4 with the condition that staff will come back and give us those figures, and then we can maybe amend it or readjust if we decide to do that in-house, and then we maybe would not extend to a second year or something like that?
Yeah, we can talk about some sort of termination provision, and I will speak to the timeline on implementing insourcing. You know, we have to go through an RFP process, which can take 6 months. It's a very complicated process. So if we were to award a contract or keep it, so let's say we kept the operation and we insourced it, for example, we would have to purchase trucks, which also takes about 9 months. We would have a recruitment process, which also takes time. So this 2 years, while it seems far off into the future, it's a pretty realistic and almost aggressive timeline.
Any good questions? Anything else on item 4 that we're looking at? Did we have a motion and a second for item 4? No motion and a second to extend the contract. Anybody want to make a motion for item 4? What's that? All right, Councilman Fierro. Is there a second? There's a second. Councilwoman Placencia looking for a vote on item 4. Motion passes unanimously, and then I think 5 is probably the next one because of the need that was illustrated today by staff and by the trash haulers, that there is a need for an increase in the rates. And so why don't we talk more about item 5 or ask questions about item 5 before we get back to 1, because regardless of which way we go in item 1, we're still going to have to address that issue. So looking at item 5 now, Councilman Fierro.
I have a couple of quick questions. Can you break down what a 12% and possibly a 20% increase would look like on a household by household basis?
Sure. Let's see. Almost there.
You're fine.
So the 11% is estimated to be about a $3.12 increase. The 20% is about a $5.37 a month increase.
Per month?
Per month.
Okay.
That's residential only. That does not address commercial.
Okay. It's obvious that we're not charging enough for the service that we're providing. Clearly, that needs to be the starting point for any city services, especially an enterprise fund like refuse. I hope we don't get to this point in the future, because this is the result of pushing off rate increases over long periods of time. It's kicking the can, whatever you want to call it, but certainly a practice I don't want to see us partake in anymore. Incremental increases are easily stomached by people. They can plan for it, they can budget for it. Same thing with commercial and business. And it's something that we can't throw on people all at once. Now, given, I'm not going to say $3 and $5 doesn't mean something to some people, but certainly I don't think it's a crippling rate increase to make sure that providing a high level of service for something critical like trash hauling. So I'm very much in support in raising it as much as we need to, whether it's incrementally or 12 now or 20 now or whatever the council deems appropriate. But more importantly, I want to make sure that we don't make a habit of this. And I'm hoping that this council and this body can be a little more proactive in making sure that our enterprise funds run effectively by charging what we should be charging.
And just to be clear again, we're not voting on a increase today. We would be directing staff to bring the proposed rate plan increase back to us for a final vote, because that has to go through a public hearing and all of those things. So that, just to be clear, that's what we're deciding on today. Council Member Melendrez.
Yeah, just a comment. You know, one of the things that this discussion does, it heightens the importance of the future, and it really heightens the importance of organics as well as other trash and the type of revenues that can be built from that as technology moves ahead. In treating our sanitation department like we do our RPU department and, you know, our water, I think it's important that we understand that this is the business component of our city. It's vitally important, especially as we move ahead with some of the financial challenges we have in the future. Initial investments are important, and I believe that this discussion really elevates the importance of how we're going to be looking at our sanitation company in the future. Thank you, Mayor.
Good comments. Councilmember Condor.
Ms. Perry, just following up on Councilmember Fierro's question, just for information, what would the commercial rate increases be for the 11 and the 20?
Those would increase at a different rate. I may ask the consultant to come up and speak to that. They're fighting.
We didn't specifically look at the commercial sector and any rate increase there, so that would have to be done in conjunction with the staff and the haulers.
So I will speak to, typically, historically anyway, the commercial rates have increased by CPI. On occasion, they may request a extraordinary. That's been very rare. What we're facing right now with this new organics legislation is somewhat extraordinary. So when staff comes back to this body, we would have more specific rate information and justification.
Councilmember Perry.
When this comes back, I think we need to be looking at the timing of not only of this increase, but perhaps other increases that have not been discussed perhaps this year. Because if we're talking about July, we're also talking about doing that at the same time as a public utility increase potentially. So something that may look like it's 3% to the consumer, it might be close to 8, 9, 10%. But it would also be nice to know when it comes back on what other potential rate increases we may be looking at during the rest of this calendar year, because we may have to pick and choose on what we like. And to be honest with you, yes, we should be looking at incremental increases. And I think we kind of started that the last couple of years because of the predicament we're in today. But let's not kid ourselves. Any increase we do, we better be prepared for the criticism that's going to come with it and being able to justify the service that goes with it, just to have that in the back of our minds and being able, as when this comes back and we take our final action, being able to justify exactly what we're doing.
Councilwoman Placencia.
Thank you. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of comments that were made earlier briefly before Gary gives me the stink eye. I just wanted to thank the employees that and some of the public that mentioned, you know, that we need to talk about climate change, that we need to talk about recycling, that we need to talk about sustainability. Those are all things that are important. And then the last comment that I really wanted to highlight too was educating the public. And so I would like to make a motion to direct staff to bring to the City Council proposed residential and commercial rate plan through 2023. But I just wanted to make sure also that we have those conversations about the education and that we're really highlighting that public education on recycling and sustainability and addressing climate change. Thank you.
Good comments. There's
Councilwoman
motions.
Placencia? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Councilwoman Placentia, if I may, staff is preparing to bring back in February a workshop on sustainability and resiliency. We could not agree more with Miss McKeith's comments about climate and Dr. Crone's comments about sustainability, and those will be focal points of our conversation.
We have a green action plan. We've retired several of them, and we've got a Riverside Sustainability Coalition as well that meets periodically. I think we need to reconstitute that. I know I've been waiting for staff to have this workshop to kind of kick off the next phase this year of meetings to the Sustainability Coalition. I know Dr. Crone's been a part of that in the past, and I'm assuming he'll be part of that again. But Council Member of Hemingway?
Yeah, just wanted to make sure. So the increases, this is a question for staff. That includes, it sounds like, a couple components, so CPI and a few others, or delayed increases that should have happened, right? What does that all include?
Essentially, on the residential side, that catches us up. So effectively, you could say it incorporates CPI and all of the other things that are happening. So it's a catch-up provision, and then we would bring a proposal for future years.
But not the organic implementation and things.
No, not on the residential side. So SB 1383, while it is adopted, we don't quite know what the program is going to look like. So there is a chance that staff would have to come back and modify based on whatever the ultimate recommendations are from the state on that.
But of course, that would go with whoever's doing that. Right?
Exactly. That doesn't matter.
Is there a chart somewhere that shows what we should have been increasing over the last 5-10 years and what the recommendation would have been? And I'm assuming then the projection will be through 2023 and beyond.
Yeah. There is an exhibit in your packet that shows where the increases have been. I'm looking for that now. Over the past 10 years, we've averaged about 2.2% increases. CPI has far exceeded that. So I haven't done the math, but the 11% gets us basically to break even. So it would make up for past years' lack of the appropriate increase.
Thank you.
We got a motion and a second on item. No, there's no second. We don't have a second. Ward 1 seconds. Ward 5's motion. Is that right? On item 5. We're getting through this. There we go. Motion passes unanimously, bringing us back to item 1. And this is, again, a suggestion to at least discuss outsourcing. And it seems at the same time insourcing and comparing the two. If we do go to an RFP, that would be the motion, wouldn't it, to go on an RFP to look at outsourcing, but in the same time, I think as appropriate, if the motion that I've been hearing is a part of that, is to consider insourcing as well and looking at the costs of both. Looking down the row, does that make sense? And is there any further questions or discussion you want to have on item 1?
Well, as I understood,
Councilmember Melendrez?
Yeah, as I understood, the study basically showed that there was not any difference in terms of cost between insourcing and outsourcing. It was pretty balanced, as I understood, at least that component of it, which would be dealing with our organics. There were some older contracts that were being looked at, and it showed that we would have to make the investments outside anyway, and we would have to make the investments inside as well to comply. Is that correct?
Basically, that's correct. So what we did look at is we very quickly looked at, if you did insource, the capital the city would have to come up with to buy the trucks and the hire
Sure.
additional drivers.
Sure.
You need about 20 additional trucks, about $8 million in additional capital. And you need to be able to find 20 drivers and hire them. You need to be able to maintain those additional trucks at your current maintenance courtyard. So there are some logistical things that are going to go in there. We didn't look at it. When we did look at it, it wasn't really a cost savings necessarily, because some of your fixed cost, allocated cost, they don't really change. So you're already spreading those out over the same account base. So there's not, you're not really going to gain any kind of the scale from that way, because you're already doing the billing, you're providing the containers, you're providing the container maintenance.
Right.
So you really, all Burtech is doing right now is providing a driver and a truck.
Correct.
So all you're really would be insourcing is those additional trucks and drivers.
Right.
Not necessarily any savings there. The contract that Burtech has right now, which is about 20 years old when it was put out, it's only been increased by the CPI. We're looking at what they're getting paid, and it's probably under market. So their costs probably are, technically they're lower than the city's cost. We don't think those are really legitimate costs. So the only way you can really get an apples-to-apples comparison would be to go through some type of an RFP process so you could really look at it. That's kind of, it's called managed competition.
Right.
We're not, suggesting or recommending that's what you go out and outsource it.
Right.
But if you really want an apples-to-apples, that's the only way you can do it.
Right.
Okay.
And the focus is, at least I heard some of the counselors indicate, along with myself, that we wanted to, I think it's too valuable a resource, especially in the future, to really give up. And I think we really need to look at this as an RPU or similar opportunity for the city, especially with the other two components we have going, which is the grease to gas and also the methane over at our sanitation, and hopefully bring those together. That would really create and solidify some additional revenue for our city.
Yeah. Well, one kind of final comment on the outsourcing. Most cities, if they've ever outsourced, they've not gotten back in the business. So if you get out of the business, the likelihood of coming back in is virtually nil. It's too expensive to get back in.
And that was very clear in your report, and that was why I think it's important for us to keep it. We are generally an older city. Right. We've been around a while. Maybe the newer cities or smaller cities aren't able to keep their sanitation in-house or can't afford to. We've seen very similar situations with our RPU, where City of Corona tried to start their own utility company, weren't able to because it was so expensive. Meanwhile, we'd had ours. Here we have our own sanitation company. We want to be able to build on that and really reap those benefits of the future of our organics. And I think we can do that. The contractors that we work with are exceptional. We certainly do understand that. But, from a business perspective, it's purely a business perspective, and the sustaining direction that we want to go, I think right now is really a defining moment as to what we're going to do with our organics and how we're going to develop those in the future. So I really like to stay with that thought, and at least the residential and the organic, by keeping it in-house and working with the contractors with extending their contracts for right now. I think it's so. I think we need to keep that really clear, because this report includes an awful lot of information, and I believe that that if we restate that, it'll be embedded and understood by everyone. Thank you.
Do you have a motion there?
That is my motion, yes. And again, well, let me go ahead and ask staff and city attorney, because I want to make sure. My motion would be that we keep the organic program in-house, along with the way we do our residential. Those are the two components, and then we continue with the outsourcing at this point. And I don't want to confuse this, because there's a lot of moving parts in here. But Cindy, what I stated is that we really want to keep this in-house. But so go ahead and share that what you're going to say.
If I can clarify, so is your motion to keep the organics going to the Agua Manza transfer station so that it stays within the city, or are you proposing that the city create an organics branch, if you will, so we would in-source all organics collection, because there's collection and then there's processing. So I just want to be clear.
That's the direction we're going. I mean, that's what we're going to be evaluating, as I understand.
Is that the direction we're going?
As I understand.
It hasn't been direction. There hasn't been direction provided yet.
Yeah, what staff is asking for is clarification more on the collection side. So that's the trucks picking up the the waste, if you will.
Right.
When we're talking about organics, the amendment that we're proposing would have whoever that is take the organic material to the transfer station, and then that material would then stay with the city through the grease to gas and all those types of sustainability programs. So I hope I'm understanding this correctly.
Let's make it a little easier. We hope to keep the sanitation staff with the city intact, and we want to make sure that happens.
Yes.
While we're moving ahead with the organic program.
Yes.
Okay, great.
So
So that is part of the motion that has been made? Is that how you understand that, Cindy, that's a part of the motion that's been made?
So the way I understand the motion is we would keep city residential collection staff and move forward with the organics program. Is that correct?
It's the city staff and, yes, the residential.
So status
program,
quo, the status quo, system status quo with the caveat of the organics, whatever you can figure out there. That's the motion.
That's the motion that was made and approved by the council.
No.
No, okay, then that's the
that's
motion.
your motion
That's the
right now. That's what we're proving
then
right
that's
now.
the motion
Item
I
one.
will make. Well, that's what I need to clarify. That's the motion
what
we
we're
want
here
to
to
make.
do.
To keep,
Item one.
To keep city staff, keep our sanitation
That's
staff
status quo.
intact.
That's the status
moving
quo.
ahead and exploring the organics program.
Councilmember Placencia.
Thank you. So I will second your motion, Councilmember Melendres. Let me just clarify to be sure. So we are saying that we are not outsourcing our services, that we are keeping our refuse services in-house. And the other piece that we discussed earlier about looking at a long-term in-housing everything else, and staff would be coming back to us with more information about what that would look like, what that would cost, and how that impacts the rate increase, correct? No? How am I off?
No.
Okay.
So the staff's asking you basically three things: status quo, okay, and then the organics caveat, or do we want to outsource? And that has to be studied through an RFP, and then that would come back ultimately for a decision whether or not we want to outsource, okay? Or what you brought up earlier, we want to study and compare outsourcing as well as insourcing. Does that?
I'll try to simplify. So there's essentially three options.
That's not simplified enough? I tried to simplify it.
No.
Am I wrong?
I need a whiteboard. That's it. So with respect to recommendation number one, staff is looking for direction. So our options are we keep things the way they are. We keep our city crews and we continue on with the 1/3 with the private hauler. The council could recommend that staff go out to RFP and bring back a comparison on the outsourcing discussion. So you're looking at apples to apples. And then third, you can say outsource everything. So there's really three options before you. And I don't know if I simplified that or not.
Councilmember Fierro. So back to Councilmember Placencia. Do you want to make a substitute motion?
Oh my gosh, I still feel like it's unclear. Throwing in the organics is throwing me off. So
don't think about the organics.
Okay.
That's going to happen.
We're going to trash the
regardless.
organics.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're done with organics.
Yes,
we'll take
we
care
voted
of that.
on that.
We're not outsourcing, and that was the gist of Councilmember Melendres' motion. So I will second his motion.
Okay. We got a motion and a second. Councilmember Fierro.
Okay. Outside of my question, so the motion is simply that we are providing the direction to staff that we would no longer like to seek outsourcing at this time, which would mean we won't be going out to RFP.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, now to my real question. What was the specific purpose of the consulting agreement? Was it to study the cost, the benefits, and such of outsourcing?
I'll go back to the impetus. So each department in the city underwent a performance audit. And out of that audit came a number of recommendations to look at the refuse operation. And one piece of that was, hey, you might want to compare the city cost of operations to that of the private sector to determine if it saves money. From a staff perspective, we built on that because we knew we had compliance issues and significant ones, so that was folded into that scope of work.
Okay. It was my understanding that it was at the direction of the Finance Committee to look into outsourcing.
So it started with the performance audit presentation to City Council last January. The next day, the Finance Committee met, and they requested that staff do an internal review of essentially the same question. Staff's findings were that we did not identify significant savings by outsourcing for the reasons we've talked about today. And we suggested that the city was probably best served by a consultant doing a deeper dive. Okay. So that's why we're here today.
Okay. And after said deep dive, you can't tell me if will save money or not. We have to go to RFP.
That is correct.
How much did we pay the consultant?
I don't know to date. I will point out that there were other recommendations in there, particularly as it relates to the compliance piece, that will be beneficial.
Okay. The only reason I say it is because clearly we have an entire department of people who don't know if they're going to have a job in a few years. And I can't in good faith continue on with letting them think they may not have a job. And if we were going to consider outsourcing, I almost don't understand why RFP wasn't part of that process as well, so that we could sit here and make a decision on it rather than, I string these guys along, these women and men along for 6 months, or I have to look fiscal conservatives in the eye and say, I don't know for a fact if it's cheaper or not. This is just in the situation I want to be in anymore. I see the value of consultants. I'm sure you guys did great work. I just think from now on that sometimes that's an easy way to say, oh, let's let these experts talk about it, and then we can just vote up or down. I think that we can reasonably come up with some ideas on this dais, city staff, and like I said, I'm in a really weird situation right now where I see both sides of the argument. So, okay. Anyone else can speak if they want.
Councilmember Edwards.
Thank you. I have had an opportunity to meet with city staff and talk at length about this study and this issue. And one piece that I found helpful that I'd love for fellow council members in the audience to hear as well is why it is as a city that we currently have this hybrid model where we have some in-house and where we are outsourcing some pieces. So I'd love for you to share that if you could.
Our speaker earlier did a really nice job of giving us a history lesson, but none of us were here then, but many years ago, back in probably the 90s, the city was annexing property. So the city had always had, for as long as I know, its own collection crew on the residential side. And as it began to annex properties, it made sense to contract those services out. And I'm only guessing, but predominantly likely due to the capital cost to start those services. So that's why we have this hybrid model. We've had a great partnership between the city and our private haulers, so it has worked well to this point.
Councilmember Perry? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Edwards, are you done? Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Okay, Councilmember Perry?
There's a ton of information here, and I think this thing's been brewing for a little while, but this is actually the first comprehensive public conversation we've had on this topic. Because there's things that I would have liked to seen, maybe perhaps part of this, perhaps an RFP should have been done long before now, where we are comparing apples to apples. But there's a lot of information in this report that, I don't know, I think I would have maybe seen a staff response to it, because I suspect we have some pretty creative and pretty smart people in public works, because that's the direction I was going to go before this motion was made, is to give you an opportunity to come back and show us how we can make this work within our city. Because I think one of the things that throws us off a little bit is through this very comprehensive consulting report that was done, we're also using numbers that are from about a 18 to 20-year-old proposal, for lack of better words, that was made. And I don't know how much that throws all of this off. But I also want just to make sure that even during this discussion, you know, we've gone back and forth on this $14 million of pension cost, and it's one day we're paying it, one day we're not, and it sounds like if we were to outsource it, it's still our responsibility, and that's just I think a piece of the pie of costs that would remain here considering this, because there's still $4.1 million in administration and collection costs that would remain with us. And what I'm not real certain on is there's a whole bunch of other figures that I don't know if it's part of this $4.1 million, because there's another $3.1 million in operational costs, 2.6 in overhead expenses, 1.5 in billing, and about $1 million in public works administration. And if we were to outsource, we would still be incorporating all of those into our daily duties. I do want to ask a question regarding funding that comes from solid waste, and who does it affect? How does it affect the general fund? How does it affect any other potential divisions or departments within the city?
Yes, there are a number of ways we could slice this pie. So in the event we outsource the operation, we do an RFP. And we load everything in there that the city is handling. Billing, customer service. We can put in there the unfunded pension liability. So all of that goes in there. If we lose the funding source with refuse, one of two things can happen. The hauler will pick that up and pass it along to the ratepayer, and if they are performing those services, they can pay the city a franchise fee or admin fee. However, they're not going to take on our HR people. They're not going to take on our IT. All of those general administrative support services no longer, they're spread thinner. So the cost for that service goes up. So unless there are corresponding reductions in other city budgets, the general fund may bear that burden.
Thank you. And not that it will make deficits or anything go away, but I went out and rode in a trash hauler a couple weeks ago, and there was a couple things that kept coming up. And I think it's things that we need to address. I think we're in the process of doing that. And some of it's been hit on a little bit by both the consultant and some of my peers, was contamination within our different trash containers. Because ultimately, I think we pay the price for that. And it sounds like we give individuals warnings to stop that. But at some point, when do the warnings stop, and when do we take perhaps a more assertive, not that we want to penalize our residents, but at the same time we also need compliance, because ultimately if we contaminate our trash cans or the contents of it, we ultimately end up paying more on that. And the same thing just kind of holds true on maybe perhaps people who didn't get their trash cans out there quick enough. And I'm not saying that it should be zero tolerance on both of these. I think we need to find the happy medium on where do we stop giving warnings and where do we have to maybe take another step to. And some of this I think also goes with one of my colleagues was saying about an educational component on proper trash dispensaries. So that's something I think we need to look at in the future. You know, and one of the other things I was concerned about, and we've heard that, you know, if we did outsource, that there's the potential, or we would make it an option, or we'd want them to take our employees. I just don't know in this whole process what discussions we've had with our employees, how long they've known about this, how it's been explained, if there's been mutual conversations. Can you hit on what kind of contact has been made with the employees?
Sure. We've been keeping city staff as much in the loop as we possibly could since the performance audit findings were presented last January. Each step of the way, we've shared the completed report with city staff, and I know that their operations managers and constant communication with them. I will go back to your first point, which is, what is the impact to the rest of the city? And one example is the mechanics. So they're supporting 23, 25 trucks for refuse. If that goes away and they do not reduce their staff, the bill rate to every other city department is going to go up. It's currently about $85. And if refuse were to go away, that would go up to upwards of $100. Those are estimates. RPU would have a significant impact. Again, we could ask that a hauler pay for these services, or a hauler may propose that, we can do it better, faster, cheaper. So in the event that the city did not keep those services, there is an impact to RPU that's pretty significant. That would be a reduction in staff or charges to other city departments if we maintain that same staffing level.
Sure, and these are just all numbers that I don't think have been taken into consideration in the whole
Correct.
picture, because there's the human side of it as well, because we're talking about 30 individual drivers, and I actually broke down their experience. So out of the 30 of them, we have 15 of them that have been here up to about 9 years, between probably I think 2 months and 9 years. We have 3 of them that have been here between 10 and 14 years. We have 7 of them that have been here between 15 and 19 years, 1 between 20 and 24, 1 between 25 and 29. I don't have anybody shaking their head no at me so far. And we have 3 of them that have been here in excess of 30 years. And I think another component in this whole consideration on this is if they were not to be employed by one of the other private carriers, what responsibilities or obligations do we have on part of the city side on offering them a job comparable perhaps of what they're making, and what type of perhaps training costs would we incur to get an employee back up to speed within a different department?
I'm looking behind me to see if HR can come up and speak to that.
Good afternoon, Council and Honorable Mayor. The current MOU provides that if these services are outsourced, the city has a responsibility to offer transfer opportunities for those that are qualified for other city jobs. There's also a responsibility for us to train them if they are if they are not currently meeting the minimum requirements for alternative positions in the city. So the city does have extensive responsibilities to engage in a process with the union prior to any of these employees being laid off from city service.
All right, thank you. I know it sounds like we have 2 new trucks that are on their way. We're in need of more. I've made this comment before regarding some of our equipment in the past, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but if Hollywood was to ever do a sequel to the Flintstones movie and they needed a vehicle for Fred to drive at the rock pile, they can come down to our city yard and probably find several of them that they could use in the movie, and we could probably make a little bit of income off that as well. In regards to savings, it all comes down kind of what our next presentation is. We've gone in the last year, we've gone from not fully funding crossing guards. Recently, we saved, I think we sold a piece of property, and 50% of that funding went into our 115 fund, and besides that, there's been no discussion whatsoever between that to laying or potentially outsourcing. And I just think there probably should have been something in the middle as far as balancing our budgets and how we're paying for things, as opposed to going from one extreme to the other. And that's why I would hope in all of this that through our public works staff that we have some options and be able to work on making this work for all of us in this city. Thank you.
Getting down to it, and round 2, I think, but we do have we have 2 public hearings remaining and another workshop that will. So if you would keep your comments brief as possible, and let's get down to, we got a motion and a second. Councilman Hemingway?
I'll just be quick then.
No,
I
this is
just
your
wanna-
first round. This is your
well,
first round.
I just
You
want to.
can-
I want to share in the concern and frustration that Councilmember Fierro and Councilmember Perry did what they mentioned, that we can't compare apples to apples. What we're looking at here, and part of it is because I would love to see as much information as possible, and on the other end as well. I mean, if we can pick up more and incremental stuff that would help us offset any increases, that would be helpful information. But after all of this process, and for those of us that are just fairly new, it's sort of hard to be clear and transparent with residents and anyone else on why the decision was made. We can't point to things and say we did this and this is the right answer, and it may not change, where I would stand. But I would love to see, on the other hand, how we can increase and do even incrementally more to offset some of future costs. So I just wanted to share in the concern and frustration there. I hope we can do differently in the future.
And I got to speak to that frustration because I'll take some responsibility for that. Part of the reason why we're here today is because there's a change in council, and so it didn't make sense to us to direct staff with the old council and then the former council, right? And then for you all to come in and say, well, that was direction from the previous council. We're going to redirect staff and for them to go through that work, and we didn't want that to happen. So that's why it's coming to you now, so you can give fresh direction to staff, even through the finance committee, who got us, so far, and now staff is hearing from the new council for the first time on this item, and that's why it's not gone through a committee. Again, it's come straight to the council for your feedback and direction. And we're not making any decisions today. Again, if you do want more information, that's up to you. That's in your purview. That's what you can direct staff to do, is to bring back more information, more detailed information, go to RFP, which costs money and time, versus, the previous council doing that. So that's why we're here today, and that's the decision we're making with this item. Council, you want to reply to that?
I was just going to say, but some of that work could have been done that we could have looked at, right? I mean, and I hear you, and yet, like Councilman Fierro said, there's folks' lives on the line here, and also it points to some deferment of decisions over the course of the last few years or more that we are now making a decision on quickly. So
sure. Well, it's not quickly. There's no urgency to this. So if you want it to take time with it, and again, we've got 2 years. We're extending the contract, so we've got time. Council Member Melendrez.
Yeah. Just to restate, obviously, I'll try to simplify. Keeping our sanitation staff intact, moving ahead with the organics ordinance in accordance with the state mandates, and you work out the contracts to make sure that all this works together. But we want to make sure that our sanitation company or sanitation department stays intact. So that's what the motion comes down to.
Well, it's whatever motion you made. So is that your motion?
That was my motion.
Okay.
And we have a second on that. But I just wanted to make sure, because I know there's other costs floating out there, but I think those are going to be worked out as we move along with this process. But we do have to get that organics program ordinance in place. And we do have to work out some contracts, but we want to maintain our staff. They've done an exceptional job for many years, and we like to keep this department intact.
Councilmember Edwards?
I do agree with the motion not to outsource work that is currently being done in-house. I hear the frustration shared that we're not able to compare apples to apples. I also hear that we may have an opportunity in-house to think about doing even more if we really invest in the department. Could we agree today not to outsource the work that is currently being done, and additionally request an RFP to explore the cost of bringing in-house the additional residential and commercial? That way we could make a decision comparing apples to apples, but also give clarity and security to current staff.
Yes, that could be a motion.
That is my motion.
Councilman Hemingway seconds that substitute motion. Councilmember Condor?
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a great discussion. I appreciate why they came down here. There's been a lot of facts distorted and some misrepresentation and some fear-mongering going on, and I'm going to try to correct some of that. A little over a year ago, we had a consultant come in here who was a very well-respected financial person and talk about the city's solvency. And one of the very first things he said is we need to, and he almost stomped his foot, he said it twice, you need to consider low-hanging fruit in outsourcing, and you need to start with your street sweeping and what remains of your internal trash collection. He gave very good reasons as to why. There's been some talk that there were certain fundings that would have to remain behind. Well, that's not correct. The $14.1 million or so that is in the pension liability, that could go away. That could be part of what a contractor would take on. You give a contractor a long enough contract, he can space that out through those years to take over that liability. We have money in the budget for trucks. We wouldn't have to spend that money. It could go to other critical things that we need. This is about our city's solvency, ladies and gentlemen. We are damn close to being insolvent. We have to save money where we can. Without an RFP that tell us whether it makes sense or not, we don't know. Now, a couple of details. It was former chair of the Finance Committee and former Councilmember Steve Adams, with the support of myself as vice chair and the former member and Councilmember Mike Subaru, directed this be looked at. And when we had that here, and I'll ask the same question because Mr. Bertrand and Alex and Mr. Nino are still in the room. The question I asked that day in the Finance Committee was, in the cities you have taken over, have you offered a job to every one of those that wanted one? And the answer was yes. Still yes, still yes, still yes. Anybody who wants a job is going to have a job. You might be in a city blue hat on Friday on Route 12, and on Monday you might be in a green hat on Route 12. Nothing is going to change. As a matter of fact, in the studies I've looked at, you're going to make more because they can do it a lot more efficiently than we can as a city. Everybody we have talked to, you can laugh all you want, young lady, go talk to the city that have been taken over. They had people that were fearful. They were going to lose their jobs. My kid can't go to college. I'll lose my house. And every damn one of them we talked to said, wow, were we wrong? We are better off now in the private industry. Things happen faster and better for us. You know, this could be a win-win scenario for Riverside because a contractor would be paying a franchise fee. So we're not spending money on new trucks. We're not spending money on maintenance. We're not spending money on pensions. And we're getting a franchise fee. It can be a win-win. You know, this is not about the great job that our guys do. I've had the same city people for 30 years that I've been here. I love them. I wave at them. I've watched them do great things. They do a great job. They're not going to lose their jobs. They're going to have them. It'll just be with a private contractor, potentially, other than the city. You know, we got to look at our fiduciary responsibilities. If we don't know what the costs are without going out for an RFP and comparing apples to apples, then we're not being what we're supposed to be to the owners of the government. You people, you out there in TV land, you own this government. And it's our job to do the best we can for you with that money. And we have problems with money right now, ladies and gentlemen. We need to look at saving every money we can. We can't bring this in-house. We don't have $8 million to buy 20 trucks. We don't have money to pay for new pensions for these people. We don't have that money. We're broke. We have problems. And we've got to look every way we can to look at saving money. So why don't we go out and do an RFP? Direct the staff to go out and do an apples for apples. Let's look at this. Let's look at what the numbers are. If it doesn't make sense, we stay. If it makes sense and we can save some money, then that's what we do to the people, the taxpayers that own this government. So I'm going to make a third motion. We need to do an RFP. We don't have the numbers. We're asking them to make financial decisions here without the numbers we have. We need to do an RFP, connect apples to apples, look at the numbers. We owe it to our citizens. We owe it to the taxpayers. And I think we need to go out for an RFP to look at these numbers.
Clarification, Council Member Edwards, did you include an RFP?
My motion did include an RFP, but what I was hoping we could do is solidify that we would keep in-house what we currently have in-house and then put an RFP out for the additional work that's being done to look at what we're contracting out now for residential and additionally thinking about what we're contracting out now for commercial, what it would look like to bring that in-house. Then we would have an apples-to-apples comparison.
But that would be implied in that motion. Right now, we're not changing any contracts or changing the disposition of the system. So there would be no job changes or any of that. They're solidified until we bring that information back to make a decision. So that would be implied as a part of that motion. So my understanding is the RFP, which is for the private sector to respond to the trash services, but you're saying that only to respond to the non-city routes or non-city system. Is that what you're saying? Do you want RFP for the entire system, or do you want an RFP for the private sector to respond to? So this is what staff needs to hear from us and be direct about it, because right now we have 3 operators. They're all here, and so do we want an RFP for the privatized portion of our existing trash collection system, or do we want it for all of it, which includes the public refuse haulers? So we need to understand that.
I am interested only in an RFP for the current residential portion that is privatized, in addition to the commercial pieces. That way, today we can walk away with clarity for current staff about the status of their jobs being in-house.
All right. And any questions on that motion? So there's an RFP, and as a part of that, looking to compare the in-house, all of it in-house. Is that implied as well? Okay. Staff, did you get that? Did you understand that? City manager, did you hear that? Yeah. So you can have an apple comparison for the most part.
Just to make sure that I'm being understood, with what I'm proposing after this meeting, the conversation would be, do we bring it all in-house, or do we continue with the status quo, which is what we do currently? So we would not be coming back to entertain, would we outsource all of our residential?
Just the commercial portion.
Commercial portion and the pieces of residential that are currently being outsourced.
Is that understood?
I understand here that it's not mine. Mine is an RFP to look at what we currently have in-house. Can it be outsourced cheaper? We need an apples-to-apples RFP to look at that. And we have to look at the other cities that have done that, and every one of those people that has now, none of them. I mean, again, I look at all 3 of them. You hired everybody that wanted a job. Everybody, all 3 of you did that. Anybody had a job, they had a job the next day. Mr. Bertrand, yes? Alex? Richard? Yeah.
We got that. Yeah. We got that covered. Yes. We got a
so
motion.
My RFP, my is for an RFP to look at what we have in-house right now to save money where we can. Again, what would go away possibly would be the $14.1 million for pension liability if they pick that up. The cost that we don't have to spend on new trucks, that we could put other places that we need money. We're bleeding money. Let's put a Band-Aid on this. And that's mine, is we need an RFP to look at this one portion. This is the simple portion that guy looked at us and said, do your low-hanging fruit. Do it now, you're in trouble.
Third motion on the table with no second. Councilmember Hemingway? Anything else?
I think it was clarified. I was trying to get clarification on Councilmember Edwards. I will just say that rarely is there a simple solution for a complex problem. You'll probably hear me say that a few times. And to make one sweeping motion from years of neglect probably is irresponsible at the very least. So I think we need to proceed carefully and cautiously. And again, now that I'm clarifying, Councilmember Edwards, I second.
Can we wrap this up? Councilmember Melendrez, do you have anything else to add?
I do. I think just the last part, is securing the employment of all our employees is what I think is extremely important. And I think what we are recommending, what Councilmember Edwards is saying, and what my motion includes, is basically, I think, the same thing, because the focus is let's move on with the organics program ordinance. Let's keep our sanitation department intact. Have staff move around with the contracts that are out there and solidify whatever needs to be done, but we need to keep our department. But I also think that with our organics, we have a tremendous opportunity for growth because we have 2 other components of it that we can bring together, and that is the methane gas and also the grease to gas and this organics. So I think I don't believe that outsourcing is something we need to be it's hard to answer at this point. We just want to make sure that our employees are kept intact, and we move ahead with this plan.
You guys understood? Yeah. Councilmember Edwards, anything else? City manager, anything else? Any further direction? Is it clear?
I just wanted to make one comment, and that is, while I understand the frustration about this consultant study, and perhaps that we didn't immediately go to an RFP, it's hard to RFP something that you don't fully understand. And the depth and breadth of what we understand now is significant. And it's with external eyes that have helped us gain an awareness and appreciation of what we have and what we do and how we do it and improvements that we need to undertake so that we can be more efficient and effective. So I appreciate the deliberation that has occurred up here because it helps us as staff understand where you, the policymakers, are coming from, and I receive and accept the criticism with the good intent that it's conveyed, but know that this consultant effort has helped us understand in a data-driven way what we're doing and how we're doing it in ways that we never understood before. So thank you for the deliberation.
Which is exactly why this was underneath the heading of workshop. So job well done. We've got a motion and a second on the floor. The substitute motion is Council Member Edwards, seconded by Ward 7, Councilmember Hemingway. Looking for a vote.
And which one are you looking on, Councilmember Edwards' motion first?
Yeah,
is that what you're looking at?
That's the substitute motion. The motion passes 5-2 with Councilmembers Melendrez and Condor dissenting. All right, we're going to